Before the age we now live in with constant reboots and remakes of films and shows that don't even really need to be remade, there was another, shorter-lived period of time where instead of just remaking the same story, they remade it with a twist. I like to think of this period of time from the 2010s as the reimagined stories era. So I've got a list of 8 different movies today that were all part of the reimagined era. Some of them stem from childhood classics, remade into a darker version, stories that have been remade tons of times before but tried to be more contemporary or modern, and even one of the most ridiculous movies of all time. So I'm going to go over each movie, my thoughts, how they did with critics, audiences, and the box office. And if the movies have been remade again since this reimagined version, then I'll be sure to point it out. So let's climb this giant beanstalk, shoot a bow and arrow like it's a machine gun, and let's get into Hollywood's strange fascination with reimagining stories. So up first is a movie that I've actually covered on this channel, and that's Snow White and the Huntsman. Released in 2012, Snow White and the Huntsman was a darker take on the classic fairy tale. Snow White was more of an action hero than a damsel in distress, and it had a lot of different spins on the lore, like the magic mirror, the dwarves, and of course, the Huntsman. There was even a sequel dedicated to the Huntsman, and it was alright, I guess, but this film was also marked with a lot of controversy, mostly due to Kristen Stewart and the director, but that's a conversation for another video. While a lot of people obviously know Snow White from the Disney classic, the story of Snow White actually originates from the Brothers Grimm. So while yes, this movie borrows elements from the animated film, this is not a Disney film, and more so an adaptation of the Brothers Grimm story. I don't want to get super into my thoughts because I've already made that separate video, but yeah, I bought this on Blu-ray for like $5, and I think it's definitely worth that. As for the ratings and box office, it has pretty average to lackluster ratings from both fans and critics, but it did do pretty well at the box office, at the very least warranting a sequel. As for if this movie has been remade since 2012, well, we kinda all know the answer to that one. There was, of course, the Huntsman sequel, but there was no proper, darker Snow White remake since then. However, there was a live-action Disney film, which has more controversy around it than even this movie had. The very next year, in 2013, we got Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. We all know the story of Hansel and Gretel, a brother and sister who get lured into a witch's home who wants to cook and eat them. You know, your everyday happy fairy tale. Well, as you might have guessed, this is another one of the Brothers Grimm fairy tales, but instead of the story being about outsmarting the witch and returning home, they become badass witch hunters. The thing that surprised me the most watching this movie was just how violent it was. It has the same sort of look as Snow White and the Huntsman, and in a lot of ways feels a bit like a spiritual successor to Van Helsing, but this movie is rated R. In fact, it's the only movie on this list with an R rating, but it also feels like it's targeting that young adult to high school range of audiences that couldn't even go see this movie without their parents. As for myself, this is another movie like Snow White that is by no means a cinematic masterpiece. The story is predictable, the acting is just okay, it's not groundbreaking in any way, but it's a fun movie. I can see how people might actually really like this movie the same way that I really like Van Helsing. This movie is fun, imaginative with all the weapons and action sequences, and how the witches are portrayed, and I think it's a pretty cool spin on this story in general. Unfortunately, it seems like not a lot of people agreed with that, because the critics, absolutely hated this movie, audiences were a bit kinder to it, and as for the box office, this movie's budget seems measly compared to most movies nowadays, only $50 million invested in it, and it made a worldwide total of $226 million, which means that this movie actually turned a decent profit. And now, this is going to be a trend on this list, but there has not been any darker, action-heavy remake of Hansel and Gretel. There was this horror movie called Gretel and Hansel by the same guy who made Longlegs. I've not seen it, so if any of you have, please let me know if it's worth checking out. A sequel to Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters has been rumored for a while. It's been stuck in development hell basically since the first movie released, and with us now being a decade plus removed from this movie, I think the sequel's chances are pretty slim. Rounding out our trio of fairy tales is Jack the Giant Slayer, a reimagining of Jack and the Beanstalk that also released in 2013. Unlike the previous two, Jack and the Beanstalk is not a Brothers Grimm story, but it doesn't stop this reimagining from being a bit darker. And I say a bit because it's really not that dark of a movie, maybe as dark as something like Prince Caspian is, but it's still a reimagining because it differs quite a bit from the original fairy tale. At its core, this is still a family movie. It's not dark and gritty looking like Snow White and the Huntsman. It's not gory and tonally confused like Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. If anything, this reimagined story feels the most appropriate out of all of them. Jack the Giant Slayer follows Jack, a humble farm boy who gets some magic beans that sprout giant beanstalks that lead to a land of giants. There's all this lore and backstory about a war between the humans and giants. There's characters vying for power, the princess runs away and gets caught in the beanstalk, so there's a team that goes to rescue her and... Wait a minute.
That's fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi.
This is honestly a pretty great fantasy movie. The characters and storyline might be a bit basic, but it's not like this story is filled with plot holes or anything like that. Everything comes together and makes for a great, heartwarming story with some fun set pieces. What really drags this movie down are the visual effects. I remember seeing this movie in theaters back in 2013 and thinking, even back then, how bad the green screen and CGI were, and when half of this movie has giants on screen and people fighting giants in a mythical giant world, the CGI and sets are pretty important. If only this movie had like a little bit higher of a budget, I can imagine... Wait, the budget for this movie was $195 million? I guess paying Obi-Wan Kenobi comes with its cons for the rest of the movie, but I mean, this movie did alright critically and with audiences, but the box office results were incredibly disappointing for the studio. This movie ultimately lost them money. Regardless of your great cast and well-rounded story, it seems like Jack and the Beanstalk just didn't interest enough audiences back then, and it still doesn't now, because there hasn't been anything, not a horror version, not a contemporary drama, or anything related to Jack and the Beanstalk since. So we've all seen, or at least heard of Hercules, right? Maybe mostly from the animated Disney movie, or maybe even the post-credits scene of Thor: Love and Thunder, for which we'll probably never see him again. Well anyways, if you don't know the story of Hercules, he's a demigod, the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, and so Zeus's wife Hera tormented Hercules throughout his life, causing him to go insane and kill his own family. So to atone for this, he went through 12 seemingly impossible labors and completed them all. So a more mature, darker stories of Hercules came out in 2014, starring the one, the only, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson as Hercules. And if that turns you off, this movie isn't even about the story of Hercules, it's about his life after the 12 impossible labors, where he's just this action hero who likes being in battles. So basically, this is just Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but this time he's in 1400 BC. I didn't like this movie very much. I watched it after my Clash of the Titans video, thinking maybe I'd do a video on this since it came up in the comments a lot, but even through this reimagining of the story, it just wasn't for me. I feel like The Rock just wanted to play some warrior, and they built the story around that. And that seemed to ring true to a lot of people because on a $100 million budget, it only made $72 million in the US and Canada and $244 million worldwide, which means it turned a small profit. As for any reboots of this story, well, I already mentioned Hercules and Thor: Love and Thunder, so perhaps we'll be seeing him in a future Thor or Avengers movie, but also maybe not. There's also recently been a lot of rumors of course, a live-action Disney version of the movie. But apparently they're slowing down on making those now, so who knows if we'll even ever see that. Now we get to a movie, or rather a character, that has been around for a long time, and that's Robin Hood. Someone stealing from the rich and giving to the poor is the type of hero a lot of people can get behind, so it seems like every couple years we get some new version of Robin Hood, and there were actually two big mainstream movies about Robin Hood that came out in the 2010s alone. There was the Russell Crowe version of the character back in 2010, a movie directed by Ridley Scott that was supposed to be kind of a spiritual successor to Gladiator, and then there was another more modern and flashy version in 2018, starring Taron Egerton. Now, there have been lots and lots of different Robin Hoods. Prince of Thieves, Men in Tights, and of course, there was also the Disney cartoon with the fox. Now, what a lot of people might not know about me is that Robin Hood is my favorite literary character of all time, stemming from both the Disney cartoon and mostly BBC's Robin Hood, which was one of my favorite shows growing up. So I've seen just about every adaptation of Robin Hood, and I can talk about both of these movies in similar ways. They're both reimaginings of the character, one of them darker, more serious and grounded, and the other very flashy with bright colors and lots of humor. And while personally, I like both of these movies, that's mainly just because I'm a big Robin Hood fan. But I think what's more interesting is how these movies speak about the landscape of films themselves and how different they are despite being just 8 years apart. Robin Hood 2010 was a grounded, historical-inspired drama reuniting Russell Crowe and Ridley Scott. The last time they worked together, they won Best Picture with Gladiator. And like I said, this movie was very much a spiritual successor to that movie, before it got an actual successor, but never mind that. But this movie was banking on those names to sell this movie. It was banking on getting critical and audience acclaim to help propel ticket sales and Oscar talks, but none of that happened. Even as a Robin Hood fan, this movie just didn't have anything that I love about Robin Hood in it. I personally feel like this would have been a much better movie had the name Robin Hood be taken out of it, and with most reviewers calling this movie boring and that being a contributing factor to the reviews, this was the first time that everybody kind of started looking at Ridley Scott a little funny. After a disastrous $36 million opening weekend off of a $200 million budget, this movie only made $321 million total, which was certainly not what the studio expected when reuniting Russell Crowe and Ridley Scott. And it goes to mention, this movie wasn't even nominated for a single Oscar. Flash forward to 2018, where, for the most part, directors and actors and Oscars aren't selling the way that they used to. But you know what does sell? The MCU. So Robin Hood turned from being a realistic and grounded historical drama to a superhero fighting crime in a fictional realm. Otto Bathurst, mostly known for directing episodes of television, made a humor-filled, stylized action movie with Taron Egerton as the titular character. But this also didn't land very well. This movie seemed like it was prioritizing the style of the film and setting up its own sequels than it was telling a story about Robin Hood. And if you thought the last movie was a disaster, the opening weekend for this Robin Hood earned a mere $9 million off of a $100 million budget. Critics and audiences hated it, it lost them a ton of money, and while there's currently no plans for a new Robin Hood movie, I'd bet by the time 2030 rolls around, we'll have another new adaptation based on whatever movie trend is popular at the time, instead of properly giving us a movie about Robin Hood. But hey, the BBC version is already basically perfect, and I'll stand by that. Along the same vein as Robin Hood is King Arthur, and while a little peasant turning into the king by chance isn't nearly as popular of a story that resonates with people like Robin Hood does, King Arthur movies have also been around for a long time. From movies to even, an animated Disney movie. So in 2017, we got King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, directed by Guy Ritchie. Now, if you know anything about Guy Ritchie and the movies he makes, you know you're in for a ride. His movies are always highly stylized, kind of like what Robin Hood 2018 was trying to be, but Guy Ritchie actually sees through his vision to the final product. Now, how that vision appeals to you is gonna differ from person to person. I've seen this movie a number of times. Sometimes I really like it. Other times I think it's complete and utter garbage, and that's flip-flopped a number of times depending on the mood I'm in, which itself is a pretty insane accomplishment from Guy Ritchie. Legend of the Sword follows Arthur and his ragtag group of people trying to help him reclaim his birthright and the throne. This is a through and through action movie with story kind of happening in the background, so if you're looking for some great medieval drama, you might want to look elsewhere. But if you're looking for some cool magic and sword choreography, congratulations, you've arrived at the right place. But what really bogs this movie down is how it doesn't really treat itself that way. King Arthur, Legend of the Sword was supposed to be the start of, get this, a cinematic universe, bringing together characters like Merlin and Lancelot in future sequels. But whether it be because of Guy Ritchie's style, the movie splitting audiences and critics, or the fact that people didn't care to see King Arthur altogether, the movie completely bombed at the box office, making $149 million worldwide off of a $175 million budget. That's a pretty major bomb, so studios have steered clear ever since, and there's been no other King Arthur reboot as of the making of this video. Speaking of movie universes that failed to ever get off the ground, let's talk about Dracula Untold. Now, this movie is a bit different than the rest on this list, because as far as I'm aware, there's never been a Disney movie with Dracula in it. I mean, he's been in lots of other things, Hotel Transylvania, Van Helsing, Batman, but never a Disney movie. So Dracula Untold was supposed to tell us the untold story of Dracula, that being that he's much more of a misunderstood guy rather than a straight-up villain. Because of this, Dracula Untold focused primarily on the action, and how cool a vampire action movie could really be, and to its credit, I totally see it. This is a pretty cool action movie, and it didn't really seem like it was setting up the dark universe until like the last scene of the movie. But in an age where vampires were sparkly hot teenagers, Dracula Untold went in a completely different direction, with both vampires and with previous iterations of Dracula. Gone were the long capes with the red collar, and in with the Targaryen-looking armor, because of course Game of Thrones was very popular when this movie came out. So this movie follows Prince Vlad as he must embrace the darkness of being a vampire in order to save his family and his kingdom. Does this sound like your typical Dracula story? No? Oh, okay, well everybody else thought so too, because the reviews were mixed at best, and the movie, while it wasn't a total bomb at the box office, it also didn't pull in the numbers they wanted it to in order to start a cinematic universe. So instead, they just lied and said that The Mummy with Tom Cruise would surely be a much better starting place. And we all know how that went. But following this movie, Dracula hasn't disappeared entirely. There was a TV show called Dracula that came out on Netflix, another TV show called Dracula that was different and came out on the BBC, Renfield that had Nicolas Cage as Dracula, and I didn't know this until researching this video, but there's even another Dracula movie coming out this year called Dracula: A Love Tale. So while Dracula hasn't gone far from the public in a while, anything actually imaginative or tonally different hasn't been seen since 2014. The last movie on this list is something completely different. It's not a Disney movie, it's not a reimagined classic of a story, it's just one of the wildest and most out there ideas for a movie I've ever seen. And that's, of course, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. I'm sure some of you have heard of this before, but for those that haven't, this movie is exactly what it sounds like. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, finds out that vampires are planning to take over the country, so he takes it upon himself to get rid of them. And for a movie with such a ridiculous plotline, it basically goes in the direction you think it would. I lied earlier, this movie is actually rated R, but it has its fun with that rating and some of the action sequences, but as you would expect, it's not any sort of historical biopic about Abraham Lincoln. Minus a few references and appearances, this literally could have been any random dude and not Abraham Lincoln. This movie also treats itself far more seriously than it has any right to. I mean, the premise is ridiculous, but some parts of this movie are played out like it's a drama. Like it's, well, Lincoln. And with a $69 million budget, the movie only ended up making $116 million worldwide, which of course didn't warrant a sequel or any other fictional movie about Abraham Lincoln killing vampires. But I think, despite the failures of these movies, at the very least, they were trying to do something different. Whether that be a stylized take of an old story, a reimagining of a story that hasn't been told a million times, or something completely new and creative and a bit silly. All these movies took a risk, and that risk didn't pay off, which is probably why we hardly see any new and original films do well at the box office. It's part of the reason why we're getting so many remakes, reboots, and sequels, because Hollywood saw all of these films as risks that ultimately failed, so the safer route to take is to just remake already beloved movies, despite these remakes not ultimately being all that necessary. And with all the films on this list being the landscape of things a decade ago, it makes you wonder what the next decade of films will look like. Are we going to be getting Jurassic World 18, or are we going to be getting more original things like, I don't know, Abraham Lincoln versus zombies? Oh, wait a minute, that already exists. So that's the list. Let me know other reimagined stories that I missed, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more stuff like this. Special thanks to all my channel members, you guys are the best, and I'll see you all in the next one.